Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So we are very happy to have Gad Alon from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern with us. Gad got his PhD in 2005, right?
Right.
From Columbia, and he's at Northwestern since. His PhD work was on competition in service industries, and now he mainly works on information sharing among between firms and consumers, and I guess the talk will be on that. He has some empirical work as well in the fast food industry, so he will be with us till Thursday night. So please feel free to go and talk to him. He's a very interesting guy. And with that, here's Gad.
Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for coming. Good afternoon. So the title of the talk is Cheap Talk in Operation, and I'm trying to capture your two papers. One is we'll be right with you that deals with service industries, and Almost Gone, which I'll explain in a second, deals more in retail. But that's kind of a part of a general agenda, trying to think about as it become more and more prevalent for firms to share information, real-time information with customers on congestion, likelihood of stockouts, and so on. The question is, how do you look at that kind of communication from a strategic point of view? And when I say strategic point of view, I basically mean that the firm can provide the information, is trying to think about what's the best way to provide information, and customers are processing this information. And I'll give more details in a few minutes. But I'm also saying that I'm admitting that there are other ways of looking at that communication, that it's not the only way of doing that. I should say this is joint work with two of my colleagues, Achal Basambo and Itai Gurvich, both of them at Kellogg with me. So as I said before, as it becomes more and more prevalent to provide this information, we try to look at how firms provide information. And part of that, what the work will try to do is to try to predict how things happen in practice. So if you look at look at the entire spectrum, it varies from firms that provide very, I would use the word vague for now. Announcement, probably the most prevalent announcement is due to high volume of calls, we are unable to answer a call immediately. But if you go and for almost a year, my colleague and I sat every day over lunch and just made calls and invented, every time imagine something, we lost a luggage, let's call all the airlines and say we lost a luggage. Let's call all the airlines and say that we want to fly from O'Hare to LaGuardia. And every time something else, and just measure time and the announcement. And for example, Southwest Airlines have two announcements. Either they say less than 1 minute or more than 10. There is nothing in the middle. And if it's less than 1, usually it is less than 1. If it's more than 10, it can be a minute and a half. It can be 15 minutes as well. If you call Continental, Continental has either nothing or more than 5 minutes. That's kind of their scheme. There are more interesting schemes. So a bank in Israel had the following announcement. If they had 10 tellers, 10 agents in the call center, if you are between number 1 till number 10, they would say that you're number 1 in the line. Between 11 and 20, you're second in line, 21 and 30, third in line, and so on and so forth. How do we know that? No, we have inside information. That's not from calling, right? That's inside information. But I'll go at the end to say why I believe that's a very clever way. I was giving this talk in Kellogg to a group of students, and one of them said that T-Mobile told him that he was number 97 in line, and came to ask me what it means. And I said, well, probably it means two things. One is that they're not really thinking, because one thing that really has, in the past it was very difficult to provide information. Nowadays, the only thing you need to do is to check. I mean, there is a checkbox from the software that you got from your vendor that says, give the information, give the current information, and 97 in line was probably meant that he is 97 in line. But if there are 1,000 agents, that may mean a second. I mean, T-Mobile probably has more than 1,000 customers waiting at any point in time. So this information, what do they mean? Do they want me to stay in line? Do they want me to leave? And that's kind of the way we want to think about it, because while there is a stream of customers, every time the information is provided from the firm to one single customer. And we can think about what's the role of the firm and how the firm is thinking about its communication versus the customer. So the first question that the firm has to ask itself is what information to provide. Do I want to provide detailed information? Do I want to provide non-detailed information? Do I want even to provide the truthful information? But the more fundamental question, and I think fundamental from the operational side, is do I want to admit the next customer or not? If I know that the queue is very long, it's probably beneficial both for the firm and for the customer that the customer doesn't join. And that's probably one of the things we want to think about here. Firms, while we all agree that firms provide information, it's very clear that firms provide information as a way to maximize revenues, probably to improve the customer experience. No doubt about that. But at the end of the day, firms provide information to improve their profits. So this is from the firm's point of view. From the customer point of view, you can think about two questions as well. The customer is going to ask himself, what does it mean? And really, what does that mean? Or what 97 in line mean? It's not so clear what it means. But at the end of the day, the more fundamental question is, once I interpreted the information, do I want to join or not? And to some extent, this will be these two questions, or two layers, will be the one we'll be revisiting throughout the talk here. We have the operational layer, which is very much an admission control problem to a queuing. We have a queuing problem, we have an admission control problem to solve, and we need to decide, do I want to admit or not? But I'm not the one deciding that. I'm just going to provide the information and let the customer decide. But on top of that, we'll have the layer that will come from the more decision-making, cheap talk, economics kind of point of view, which will try to see what information to provide and how customers interpret this information. And we'll try how the interplay between the two result in what we see in practice or not, when it breaks and when not. If you have any question at any point in time, don't hesitate to stop me. This is very much the talk will be on delay, but you can think about similar problem in retail. When I say retail, that's a tie that I saw a while ago on Sierra Trading Post. Anyone here goes to Sierra Trading Post? If you buy hiking gear, that's probably a very good place. They have a warehouse somewhere in Wyoming, so their prices can be beat, but once in a while, they have the occasional tie. So let's say that you want to buy this tie. And you'll press, and it will take you to this part, which usually is the bottom of the page. And you see that there are two types. There is this wine, and there is gold. And near the gold, there is the tag almost gone. If you go to the frequently asked questions and search for the word, and look for the almost gone, it says that if the tag almost gone is attached to a product and you want it, you should buy it now. Okay. So we monitored that tie for 9 months when it was always almost gone. So from that, we clearly understood that when they really mean almost gone, it's very different than what we mean almost gone. Or this is really a very unappealing color. But assuming, and it does appear on several products, they are very discerning in the way they do that. It's not they do it on every product. So I would say there is another paper written only on the retail side, and the results are very different than the one on the queuing side. I'll go back at the end to some discussion, because the results here are simpler, but I'll go back to that. You can think about the retail also. Airlines, when they provide you information on how much tickets are left in price, in certain price and so on, all of that will fall into this, which is very different than what I'm going to do today. But I'll maybe go back to that at the end if I have time. So let me go back to the service queuing kind of environment and just do a brief overview of what has been done until now. I'll do a better job in terms of literature review in a few minutes, but for now, I'll do that. I'll do kind of this basic scheme. And I'll just say that until now, the key assumption in the literature, there is a long literature on how to provide information to customers, but this literature has the following issues. First of all, the literature confines itself or always assumes that the information is treated as credible. What do I mean credible? Customers are treating the information as credible, and then the firm is restricting itself to providing credible information. The second thing is that information is always, in all of this literature, the information is a priori fixed, the information structure. What do I mean? Either you provide full information, the best information I have, or I provide no information, and customers are supposed to have some beliefs on the system. You can say that even if I want to provide full information, in most queuing systems, that's a very complex problem. I mean, definitely if you have reneging and people leave based on the information I want to give, even if I want to tell people truthful information and very accurate information, it's not that easy. But that's really not the direction that we wanted to go. We want to go, and we want to test the following assumptions, not to test, but we want to relax them, First of all, we believe customers are not always naive. Customers may not be naive, and when I say customer may not be naive, it's not really that that's a critical issue, but customers are not naive. If the firms believe that the customer is naive, they will misrepresent the state. I think the story that many people, I'll go back to the other issues in a second, but how many people here ski? So it's a superset of those who go to see our trading post. But so there is a paper, anyone familiar with the paper from Dartmouth on ski level, on a snow level? So the story is the following. There are two guys from Dartmouth that wrote a paper that test the following. So they tested how much snow is being reported, snow level reported, on different ski resorts in the US. And what they noticed that there is what they call a weekend effect. There is more snow over a weekend than the middle of the week. So now they went to the weather authorities and checked, and apparently there is no weather effect. So God has no preferences for weekends over midweek. More than that, what changed the story completely? The emergence of the iPhone. If you have iPhone and you do ski, you know that there are like at least 5 apps that tell you exactly where what's the snow level. And the resorts in which there is a very good iPhone reception, the gap between the reported one and what really happened shrank to 0. So this is basically saying, well, we may not be, maybe we're a little bit naive, maybe we're not, but if the firms think that we are naive, they will misrepresent the state. I think for us, that's really, that's not the main issue. That was not the main motivation. The main motivation was the following, that the information the firm is telling us is not verifiable. And that's really the crux of the matter. It's very clear that if the firm is telling me information that is verifiable, I should react. But what if the firm tells me something that's not verifiable? That the queue is longer than expected? Why should I react to that if I cannot verify it? If I'm 10th in line, I cannot verify it. And I just gave you examples in which it was clearly not true. Why would I still behave as if it's true, or maybe not? How the fact that information is not verifiable will factor into the communication between the firm and the customers. And as a side note, I will say that part of that is also the information is not quantifiable. The assumption is that I can take the number until now was that I can take the number and plug it into my utility function. How do I plug into my utility function the fact that the queue is longer than expected? That's not something I can do. So the question that we want to ask is, what is the right information structure? And I put right in quote unquote because it's not so clear yet what I mean by right. I'll have to refine a little bit and refine it a few things before I can get back to this question. But that's, after all of that, I think that what we want to, the idea is that we want some model that will relax these assumptions or will allow us to handle these issues, and that's what we do here. That's what the suggested framework that we have is to develop a framework that deals with the strategic nature of the information transmission in a practical operational setting where unverifiable, non-committal, real-time information is provided by self-interest firm to selfish customers. Let me start from the bottom. So the idea will be to look at a game between a firm and a stream of customers where the firm will be self-interested in the way it wants to maximize profits, but the customers themselves also are selfish in the way they act. And that's nothing really new here, but what we want to look at is to look at the equilibrium that may emerge. We're going to look and call this equilibrium language. Why a language? Because the language is basically a set of messages that I tell you and you know how to react to. So that will be an equilibrium when the firm will be able to say something and the customer will be able to react in a predictable way. And what we'll show is that even though the information is unverifiable, and even though there is no commitment with the information, so if I tell you that the queue is long, there is no commitment in doing that, when we look at what we do, it actually allows to predict pretty well what happened in practice. So many of the messages that I mentioned before, as what Southwest are doing, what Continental, even what the bank in Israel are doing, will arise as equilibria from the game that I'm going to show here. And that will depend very much on the fact that it's a queue and we know how queues are managed and so on. And that's basically the goal. And then this framework is used also in the retail paper that I mentioned, but I'll show this application here in this model. Question? Yes?
It seems that the firm would calculate what's the expected amount of time you'll wait and just tell you that time.
So the question is, can we do better than that?
Why is that why is something else better than that?
Right, so that's a good question. I think it's clearly, if I just tell you the average, The average customer should be able to know the average without the firm if they are rational. And we know that in many cases that will not result.
Calculate an expectation based on your place in the queue and the call volume, etc. So it's not information that you know.
Oh, you mean given the fact that if you join the queue, what will be the average time for you?
Yes.
But that's exactly what is non-verifiable.
No, it's not verifiable, but it's the simplest mechanism that you just give this number, and why is something else better?
No, so let me ask you before. That's a good question. Why will that work? Why will the customer take this information and now believe that that's true?
First of all, it may be not verifiable in foresight, but it's verifiable in hindsight. So if you call them many times,
but you're not getting one action, right? You're not really. They will not tell you in what state you got it. But that's a very good question, and that will be the main test that we'll try to look at the equilibrium. Sometimes this will be the equilibrium. But what I'll show is that it will be an equilibrium on a very, very, very narrow set on cases, which is of measure 0. But apart from that, I mean, it is a very desirable equilibrium if we can achieve it. I agree. You cannot do better than that if you can sustain it. In some cases. Some cases, actually, it's not even good for the firm to do that. And I'll show that as well. So but
suppose the average is much higher than the median, then you may not want to actually convert the information to a customer.
So there's no concentration.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking if the firm gives the illusion that you respect customers' times, even though that may not be true, that even if a person has to wait a long time, they said, we respect what you said, we strongly suggest you call back at another time, but you're more than welcome to stay online. And then you give me a choice, and then you're saying,
yes.
As opposed to, because I'm thinking now, I'm sitting here and I'm laughing, because like you said about the iPhone apps, it's even worse. I love my Twitter feed, because when people have a terrible experience at the airport, they will tell everybody. And these are not people who complain, so their word carries weight.
Yes.
So companies are not getting away with
Yes.
lying to people, saying, oh, I'm going to maximize my profit, I'm going to keep them on the line, and then lie to them.
I should say from the beginning,
Found out about that.
I would say from the beginning, in equilibrium, you will not lie.
Okay.
In equilibrium, it's never an equilibrium to lie. But it's never an equilibrium to say the truth. So let me say it like that. We had a section that the referees forced us to change the name, that had the question of, should I tell the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth? And the story was, you want to tell the truth, you want to tell nothing but the truth. You don't want to tell nothing but the truth, but you don't want to tell all the truth. That's the answer. Now let's build to that. But that's very much the answer. And then I think that addresses both of your questions. But we'll see exactly where it factors.
Okay.
That's a literature review. I will not go into too many details. As I said, there is a long literature. Actually, the person that began the entire literature, and I think some of you know his son, Sefi Noor, the person that started this entire literature on queuing, in which you admit that customers are not packets, but actually are decision makers, is Noor. Noor was the founder of the IE department in the Technion, and I think you know some people, other people there. There is a long literature that uses that. There is some literature on delay announcement, long literature on that, as I said. We build to some extent or echo the literature on cheap talk. And cheap talk is the idea that you have a single sender of information with some private information, and you have a receiver of information, and he's the one that cares for the state, but he's the one that takes the action. And what Crawford and Sobel, which were the first to show, but there is a big debate if it was not Crawford, that was the first published work. People say that Holmstrom had this in dissertation before. But anyway, Crawford and Sobel, their idea is that if the fact that there's misalignment between the firm, between the sender and the receiver, will result in some information loss. That's their main result. Recent papers are taking that more to the political economy side, political science side, and then there they look at kind of more think about, you have a Congress, a committee in the Congress that you bring in an expert that knows something about the world, better informed than you, but also is biased in terms of what policy is trying to induce. And the question is, how do you form the question in a way that you can elicit all the information from this agent? In what sense we are different? We are different in multiple senses, but I would say the economists here refer to our paper as the first endogenous cheap talk, because in their models, the uncertainty is always external to the model. Whether there is global warming or not, it's something that's external to them. External, we know the distribution. We don't know the exact realization, we know distribution. In our case, the distribution is really created and driven by the customer behavior. So I'm telling the customer something that they, or I'm telling the state of the system, but they actually impact the system more than anything else. So for example, the likelihood of having 5 customers in the system, if all customers decide not to join, is 0. And clearly the distribution will change depending on the customer behavior. So we'll show a little bit how that impacts if I have some time. So that after this literature review, we're ready for the model. And the model, initially, I'll show a very basic model. Very basic model, and then if I have time, I will definitely have time to relax it, but I have more relaxation if we'll have time to discuss. And if you have questions, I'll try to address them. But that's the most basic model. And the basic model is the following structure. Think about everything you see on that slide is common knowledge. Common knowledge to you, common knowledge to the firm, common knowledge to the agents. So everybody knows whatever we have on the slide. So a single server, single agent serving at the rate of mu. Customers arrive at the rate of lambda. That's external demand. Upon arrival, the firm is going to provide delay announcement to the customer. The customer may decide to leave. If he leaves immediately, we scale the value that he's getting and the value the firm is getting to 0. No harm is done to anyone if the customer leaves immediately at his own will. If he decides to join, the customer utility is going to be R, some reward minus the cost of waiting time, the actual waiting time. If the customers decide, and the firm is getting V minus H times the waiting time. What is H? C is very clear. H is the cost of holding the customer in line. Think about 1-800, the fact that the customer had a poor experience and may not come back, may tell it to other people. All of that is modeled through H. H doesn't have to be linear. These are easy relaxations. We're just writing it here as linear. In the paper, actually, it's not. And the properties of that are very simple.
Are NCR the same for all customers?
Yes. So initially, I'm going to look at the single class. All customers are homogeneous. Yes. Later on, we can relax that as well. Yes. In particular, R and V can be C and R can be equal V and C equals H. If that's the case, then it's the social welfare. It's not a firm. You're maximizing the social welfare. So you can capture using that pretty large spectrum of problems. It doesn't have to be a specific to that. And the question is, when and how delay announcement influence customer behavior? What do I mean? Until now, I discussed credibility, but I actually don't know what credibility means. For me, the main test for credibility, I'm going to convert it to what I'm going to call influential equilibrium. Influential equilibrium will arise if I can show you at least 2 messages that result in different actions. If all messages result in exactly the same action, customers join with some probability regardless of what I tell you, maybe I'm a very credible organization, but I clearly cannot convey it to the customer. So what I really want to show is that I can have 2 different messages, and my question will be how I can do that and when I could do that, try to provide conditions when that's possible. Let's go deeper a little bit to the equilibrium. So the equilibrium concept is Markov perfect Bayesian-Nash equilibrium. So what we have here, we have a firm, the strategy of the firm, just to remind you, the firm is the one that has private information. In particular, the firm knows the state of the queue. It knows how many people stand in queue. And what its strategy is the mapping from the state of the queue to a message space. And when I think about message space, anything is possible. You can think about counting in English, counting in your own language, music, whatever you want is a message, is a valid message. The customer doesn't know the state of the queue, but he will have a mapping from the state of the queue, mapping from the message to a decision. Ym in particular will be the likelihood or the probability of joining given message M. Initially, I'm going to look at pure strategies, then I'm going to look at mixed strategies, but if pure strategies, I can either join or bulk. And what we said before about the endogeneity is that what the next customer is going to see going to depend exactly on how I behave. If I decide not to join, I save them another 5 minutes of waiting. If I decide to join, he's going to wait a bit more. In the mathematical format, it's basically that's the definition of the equilibrium. It's going to be the last slide that's really going to be with that much math, but it's nothing really too complicated to some extent. That's the customer point of view. Customer is going to decide to join based on his inference of the state given the message that he got. It's basically using Bayes' rule to try to find exactly how much utility he's going to get. The firm problem is a bit more complicated because the firm is solving a admission control problem. So it's a Markov decision process. Every time the firm is asking himself, given the fact that the customer is indeed going to do what we want him to do we want him really to join or not? And here the assumption is the customer indeed does what he wants. Here the assumption is that the firm indeed follow that, and that in equilibrium we need both to hold. So it's a fairly complicated definition for something that we can intuitively explain.
The goal is always to reduce the number of customers in queue, and is that roughly
Not
correct?
necessarily. So I'll go back to that in a second. Actually, that's a good question, because in a second I'll convert it into exactly this type of question. Instead of staying with this kind of formulation, I'll convert it exactly to this type of question. What is exactly the goal of the firm? Leading to that, just kind of a step before that, let's imagine the Markov decision process. So the Markov decision process, the birth-death process, all of us are familiar here with birth-death processes and things like that, some level. So this is one way to describe the evolution of the rates between the different states. So these are the different states. This is 0 people in the queue, 1, 2, 3, 4, and on. I want to describe the rate. So I think about customer arrive at the rate lambda. When I'm in state 0, the message that I'm going to provide is g of 0. I don't know what this message is, but it's g of 0. And the customer doesn't know what's this message, but he has a mapping from the message to an action, which is y of g of 0. So the transition rate will be lambda of y of g of 0. And here it can be probabilistic as well. So it can be that it's, let's say, half. It will be half of lambda. And that will be the transition rate from state 1, 0 to 1. Similarly, 1, and let's say that I can populate it now. Let's say for a second, just for the thought experiment, that for whatever reason, y of g of 5 is 0. Just for the thought experiment, for a second. Let's say that there is a message that's going to come, and the customers are going to decide to bulk in that message. Okay? No.
G of 5 is just a function of 5.
Yes. So G of 5 is a 5, right? What we show in the paper, I'm not going to that the firm will never randomize on the message, but it's not. We're a little bit premature for that. But you're right. That's what we assume here. And let's assume now that we have G of 5 6 and G of 5 7. Just to complete the picture, we need now the force back of mu, and that's basically the description of the birth-death process. What do we know about the likelihood of being at state 7 in steady state? What's the likelihood of being here? 0. It's a recurrent. All of these are recurrent states. 6, 7, and 8 are transient states. So basically, I can forget about these. What was the idea here? The idea was that to show that I can actually focus only on thresholds. And I can focus only on thresholds not from any game theoretic point of view, not from any game theoretic consideration. It's really because of the fact that once customers decide to bulk, I don't care from that point on what happens. I mean, there are many people in queuing that show that there are this behavior of holds, that there is joining, then leaving, then joining, then leaving, and whatever. That cannot happen in this situation. So we can really, and that's going to your point, we can really focus on thresholds. What I showed here is for the customer, but actually I'll show it in a second, also for the firm. Why will that be important? Because now I can take this entire complex definition of equilibrium and say that I can describe all the different types of equilibria based on 2 types of thresholds. So this is let me stop for a second and say that this is the main slide of the paper. If you want to leave after that, that's it. Everything after that is just refining and showing how that holds in greater generality. But I'm looking here at the basic situation that I showed you and looking at pure strategies, not mixed strategies in a second. And I'm saying that I'm the following. Let me take any system, and every system, just to remind you, in every system, the firm has private information, and the customer is the one taking the action. But I can think about for a second that what if the customer actually knew the system? If he knew the state of the system, he will have a threshold on the number of people in the system. He would join up to this point and will bulk from this point on. Right? I mean, that's very simple. We know also that if the firm, that's the firm, if the firm had the ability to throw customers off the system, it will have a threshold as well. It will have the customer join up to a point, and it will kick them from one point on. And it's not a complicated result. It requires some conditions, but it's not a complicated result. I mean, Naor and Knudsen and many other papers show that. What I'm going to claim now that I don't need to know anything about the system. I don't need V, H, R, C. I just need to know what's the ranking between these 2 threshold, and I can tell you what type of equilibria will arise, if any. So let's start. Let's look along the line, the 45-degree line. Along the 45-degree line, I can describe the system like that. Let me use this graphical representation throughout the talk, so let me explain a little bit what I mean here. So this is basically the queue. This is the server. This is the threshold of the firm. This is the threshold of the customer. The pluses and the minuses stand for what is the utility of the customer if he joins at that state. What do I mean? If a customer joins when he comes here, he will get positive utility. Positive, 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 positive. From here, negative, we know that because that was his threshold. So the positive and the negative just stand for the fact that the customer is getting positive utility had he joined in that state. Okay, just nothing too complicated, just to try to show that. So what will be an equilibrium here? Tell the truth. I'm going to go into tell the truth later on. For now, let me say that there is a two-signal equilibrium. What is the two-signal equilibrium? I will say low on these states. I will say high on the other states. Customers, when they hear low, will join. When they hear high, will bulk. Let me explain it in a second. I know it's probably trivial, but I think it's good to go through the proof now because that will maybe become a little bit twisted in a second. It's very easy to see that if the firm, when the firm say low and the customer know when they say low, the customer has nothing else to do but to join when they say low, and the firm has nothing, and the customer has no incentive to bulk when they say low, and so on. It's also important to see that when the firm say low and they know that the customer joins, they have no incentive to say low on any other state by these states, because they don't want the customer, for example, to join here, because that's above their threshold. So the customer has no incentive to misrepresent, and the customer has no incentive to not to react, and the firm has no incentive to misrepresent. Okay? I will say that it doesn't have to be to signal. Actually, you can tell the truth along this line. That's true. Yes?
How the customer understands the signal that's being said, and are we assuming that somehow or the other they know what it means?
That's a good question. So for now, I'm describing the equilibrium.
Right.
What I will have later on is a description of how customers, through best response dynamic, may learn exactly what it means. That's a good question. Here, I'm showing you what may be an equilibrium, but I kind of assume that customer will know how to react even though the first time they called. But later on, I'll show you that actually I can get there. Okay? But that's only a single line on this time spectrum. Let's try to go to this triangle here below. So this triangle below, the system looked like that. So now the customers would like to join a more congested system than the one the firm would like them to join. For those familiar with I mentioned Naor before, Naor showed that whenever the firm is a social planner, that's exactly what will happen. Customers do not internalize their impact on other customers, and because of that, they will join a more congested system than the one the planner would like them to join. What will happen here? What type of equilibrium will we have? Good way to start seeing if we're. What type of equilibrium will we have?
It can be like before, but so if in the first 5 states the firm says low, and then the next, but in all of them the firm says high, and then since these all other states are pulled in together, maybe for customers it's maybe an equilibrium behavior for them not to wait.
So you say low here and high here.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that an equilibrium? Well,
It depends on how many states there are and stuff like that.
that's a good question. How many states there are? I would say it's not an equilibrium. And let me try to see what will happen. The firm clearly has no incentive to deviate. The firm says low here, the firm says high here, customers join, customer bulk, the firm has no incentive. The question is about the customer. If now I tell you that it's low Q, do you have incentive to bulk? No. If I tell you that it's high Q, you need to bulk. Will you bulk?
So the red thing will be all the way after.
That's a good question, but if everybody else, all the other customers follow your recommendation, and I'm the only customer that now comes to the system and thinks, should I join or not? At what states, if I'm hearing high, at what state is it?
It's right up there.
It's exactly here. So I will always get positive utility. So saying low here and high here is not an equilibrium. It will break exactly here. What other option? What if the firm concede to the customer and say, we'll do, say, low here and high here? Is that an equilibrium? Why? Now the firm is insane. The firm established that whenever they say high, the customer will balk. They will say high, but they will not say high here. They will say high here. So now the firm has incentive to misrepresent the state. What we show, I mean, these are only two cases, but we show in greater generality that this entire region, at least in pure strategies, there is no influential delay announcement. So the firm cannot convey in any way information in this lower triangle. That's the grim part of the talk. Let's move to the more optimistic part. What happens if we now reverse it? I'll go back to a discussion of that in a second. But what happens if we reverse it? If we now, firm would like to join, the firm would like them to join a more congested system than what they would like to join. Will we have now an equilibrium?
So just to go back to the other case, if the system is not deterministic, does the...
So here I'm talking about pure strategies. Good question. I'm talking about pure strategies. We'll get some value from mixed. So what are we getting here? What will be the key question? And I think the first question that we want to think about here is how much utility do customers get? We know already, we're fairly tuned already that we need to think about the firm's first best. So if we think about the firm's best, let's try to see how much utility the customers are getting. If the customer over all of these states, and that's what the green is trying to say, if the customers on average over these states are getting positive utility, then actually I can get a two-signal equilibrium. And the two-signal equilibrium will have exactly the same structure before. I will say low. I mean, first of all, it's very clear that I don't need to test it for the firm. The firm is getting its first best, not going to deviate. When I tell the customer high, it's very clear they're going to bulk. But what about when I say the customer low? When I tell the customer low, they know that they are joining the system in states that they are getting negative utility. They know that they may be dissatisfied in some situations. But on average, they have no other option. They are getting positive utility and they have no reason to deviate from that. That, of course, ends once you start to push it too much. And that if you go above this curve, now you cannot sustain it anymore. Because now you try to lure them into a system that is a bit too congested for them, and they resent it, and you cannot sustain equilibrium.
That depends on all of the other parameters.
Again?
The location of that.
Yes, exactly. That depends on other parameters. Exactly. And in the paper we characterize it. But I think the point that I want you to take from this figure is the fact that this line is a fairly delicate line to some extent. The move from the actions of the customer leaving or joining the system are not symmetric. When I join the system, when I ask to renege, so when I join the system here, I cannot detect the state of the system. When I'm supposed to join and I join, I cannot detect the exact state of the system. You tell me that more than that, the firm will not allow me to detect the state of the system. The firm is not interested, if I go back to your discussion before, but the firm is not interested in letting me too much information, because if they give me too much information, it will break the equilibrium. And it will reduce their ability to sustain their first best. Because just to remind you, we're talking about unverifiable information, and the firm is achieving its first best. Unverifiable, no commitment whatsoever, and the firm is achieving, it's maximizing its profits.
Well, I mean, introducing some complexity. When each call comes in, it's like each customer is being considered equal, but there are some customers maybe like...
I'll go back to that. That was his question. If there are different R's and C's and so on, I'll go back to that at the end. I mean, I have a few slides for that. I'm not sure if I'll have time, and if not, I'll be able to discuss it.
One customer who is happy or online versus...
Yeah. So I'll agree.
Okay.
It's a base model, and we said the results will not change significantly. They will have to be refined a little bit. It will not be 2. It will be, if I have n class, it will be n plus 1. But I'll go back to it if I have time. No. Yes?
Like on the other situation, which we had before, like on the lower triangle, would there at least be a dominant strategy for the firm, which looks similar to the curve which we have for the customer? I mean, because the firm could argue its in the same way that I have at least an expectation of the cost, which is, or an average.
You mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean in this area?
Yeah.
A dominant strategy that regardless of what the customer do, they should react in a specific way? I don't think there is a dominant strategy here.
They could provide the messages the customer will anyway ignore them. So
I'll go back to that in a second. No. I'll go back to what you're calling is a babbling equilibrium. That will come in a second. That will come in a second. Until now, I discussed really the question of influential versus non-influential. But let me lead it to the following. Just summarize what we've seen. We've seen that the key finding was that the pure strategy, Markov perfect Bayesian Nash equilibrium with influential cheap talk exists only in some settings. But when it exists, actually, it's a fairly good description of what we see in the most prevalent messages from Southwest, Continental, many others. I can even not name the number of people, firms that do that. The high congestion, low congestion, or the no information, we're experiencing longer delays than usual. Most of these are basically partitioning the state space into two. One saying you must bulk, one is saying do not, stay in the system, it's okay. But clearly there are many questions. I think the two questions that arose here were, first of all, is this the only type of equilibria that exists? But more importantly, I think when it doesn't exist, what other equilibria may exist? Because we know the entire triangle there, I mean, not only the triangle, the area above, what else can we do? I think the way I'm going to tackle that is going through three types of equilibria. One is that I call babbling equilibria, described in a second. It's not my name, that's the name from the cheap talk. I'll go into mixed strategies, and I will not go into most informative. Most informative is basically saying the question I showed you two, how far can I partition it? And what we show in the paper that unless you are on the diagonal, you will never partition it completely. And I think we saw the reason. At least one reason, we'll see another reason in a few minutes. But let me go into babbling. So babbling equilibria are equilibria in which the firm is saying a message that is either not saying a message or saying something that is uncorrelated with the state, and the customer, rightfully so, disregards it. In cheap talk games, it always exists. In our game, it does not exist in pure strategy, but exists in mixed strategies. I think it's nice to see why it does not exist in pure strategy always. It does not exist in pure strategies because now, once you let the customers play among themselves, there is a game among them, and there is a term, avoid the crowd, to describe some of the queuing. If everybody joins, I would like to bulk, and if everybody bulks, I would like to join. And because of this tension, when there is no information, sometimes there is just chaos, or there is there is no equilibrium in pure strategy, but there is equilibrium in mixed strategies. So for example, if you think about the entire thing above the sleeve, there is no equilibrium in pure strategies. That's an area of tension, high tension between the different types of customers. But now that we established that there is always the babbling, mixed or pure, now we can go into this result, which I think is probably the main result of the paper, which says that when an influential equilibrium exists, it is beneficial both for the firm and for the customers. So while we think about the firm as one that tries to maximize the profits, at the end of the day, when you can establish some level of credibility, it's actually value enhancing. It's not that it's a zero-sum game. I'm increasing the size of the pie. Clearly, the firm is taking a larger share of the pie. I mean, it's not, no one is here as a charity, but they're leaving still a good chunk for the customers. And to some extent, that also puts some, motivate us even more to try to establish other equilibria. Because now we know that in the areas that there is no equilibria, maybe we can find a more clever way of trying to have a scheme that is a little bit influential. But that's kind of, I think that's somewhat of the, because we think about this thing as a way to try to lure the customer. Maybe the language that we're using here can be a bit deceiving in the way that the belief that we want to provide the poor service. At the end, we want to provide good service. One way to think about it is also as a mechanism to match expectation. I tell the customer what's the state of the system, and even though there is really no reason to believe, customers believe, react properly, and get higher values than it would get if they would disregard it. Okay? Let's go to mixed strategies. So there's a way to try to understand, but also I think the way to understand the system. So let me describe, again, the system using this way. The customer, and only I need the threshold of the customer. I don't need really the threshold of the firm. What do we know? We know that if the queue is very short, right? If the queue is very short, both the firm and the customer would like the customer to join. Agreed? We know that it's green. I'm not sure if you see it as green. Yeah. We know that if the queue is very long, and this stands for very long, both the firm and the customer agree that the customer should bulk. So if there is any disagreement, it really should be only in the middle. And that's somewhat also good, because if I need any mixing, I need a mixing some positive states and some negative states. If it was always positive states, the customer will always join. If it's negative states, it will bulk. If I need any mixing, I need the value to be such that it will be indifferent. So let's say it will mix there. So the question now is that until now I showed you everything that 2 messages was enough to get the first best. I could maybe refine it, but if I have inferential equilibrium, 2 messages were enough. Is that the first time that I really need 3 messages? Join, mix, and bulk. When I say join, I mean a message that will cause the customer to join. Think about low congestion, medium congestion, and bulk. Is that Southwest just forgot to tell the customer that sometimes it's between 1 to 10? We just don't know how to say that, but it's sometimes between 1 to 10. So should we have 3 messages? Here we have to go to queuing theory to know if there is we need 3 messages or not. What queuing theory shows us is that the solution, the admission control problem from the firm's point of view, is always a bang-bang solution. Is always a bang-bang solution. The firm, in its optimal strategy, will never randomize. What does that mean? It means that we can never have, in one case, bulk in probability 1, a message result in bulk with probability 1, and a message result in join with probability 1. Because if I have 2 messages, both result in joining and bulking with probability 1, the firm will never use the mixing. Will never use the mixing. So if we want to have an equilibrium, we must take one of the hands. We must have an equilibrium in which we say either mix initially and then bulk, or join initially and then mix. To some extent, think about, I'm not sure if here you have roads that tell you information on congestion. You drive on the road and you know that you're in the lower triangle, right? You know that the social planner is writing this note. And it tells you that 10,000, or it tells you that the road, the congestion in that route is now 4 hours. Well, let's say it tells you that there are 10,000 customers in line. If it's 10,000 customers in line, you should bulk. But if you bulk when the firm tells you that there are 10,000 customers in line, it will tell you again that there are 10,000 customers in line, but not when there are 10,000 customers in line. It will tell you when there are 5 customers in line. So to some extent, whenever they tell you that there are 10,000 customers in line, you must, even though it's against your will, or it should not tell you that 10,000 customers in line, but it should tell you something that will drive you to mix. So the mixing here is essential. To some extent, the mixing is essential to keep the firm honest. And that's another reason that we'll see always some level of vagueness. The firm cannot break it, because if the firm will break it, it will lose the ability to convey this information. The mixing region will always stay such that the customer is incentivized to mix over these. These are clearly not first best. The firm lost already the ability to achieve its first best, but at least we are getting higher value than providing no information. So if you think about the lower triangle, we cannot really get the clear result we had before, but we are getting the same level of message, and we are getting somewhat an improvement compared to what we had in the past. Any questions now on that? Was that? Yeah.
Just to make sure, so there are 2 messages, one which says the right one, for example, one which says join and the customer believes it. The other one, whatever it says, the customer says, I'll toss a coin.
Right, exactly. What we show in the paper, and I think that was also an answer that I had before, was that I showed that in the paper, if the firm will not mix, it's never optimal for the firm to mix. It's also, we showed that it's never optimal for the firm to break it, not provide information on intervals. So it's always optimal to provide information on intervals, and it's always optimal for the firm to provide deterministic messages. So the one mixing here is the customer. And the way to think about it is exactly that. I'm going to provide you a message that will say intermediate level of congestion, and you know that that means that you need to randomize in a specific way. Yeah. I go back to your question now, because until now the assumption was that customers know everything. They know lambda, they know mu, they took a good class in queuing, so they know even how to compute the probabilities. They know many, many different things. They know, well, even though you call for the first time, just like the student got an announcement 97, he knows exactly how he needs to react when there are 97 people in line. But that's not really how it happened in reality. And there is a paper by Kalai and Lehrer, Ehud Kalai, father of your colleague, that said, okay, the name of the paper is a rational learning leads to Nash equilibrium. And there is a long literature continued by Freudenberg and Levine and Hart and Mascolel that try to ask, is that always the case? What are exactly the way that we need to have it to work? Here, what I'm going to show you is only a numerical experiment. I'm not going to show the entire theory. The entire theory needs still to be tightened a little bit. But it tried to show the following. It tried to say, well, let's take the simplest updating mechanism. What's the simplest updating mechanism? The only thing I'm trying to update is what is the likelihood that I need to join based on a message. I'm not even trying to understand what a message means. I just try to understand how should I react to a message. And the updating is very simple. If I don't join, I keep the same probability. If I join, I update based whether the experience was positive or negative. I'm not even refining anything. Clearly a very myopic and maybe dumb way. But that's the way we assume. And the firm knows every period we're going to discretize the game. And every period knows what happened in the past, how many customers joined, how many customers bulked, and it's going to update in a very myopic way its new threshold. Okay? And what we see is the following. So this is one experiment. We said, let's start with half. Customers don't understand the language. They come, and when they tell you join, they don't know if they need to join or not. They flip a coin. If I tell them bulk, they flip the coin. And what we see, but they update very quickly, and what we see is that very quickly it converges to equilibrium. I mean, it goes very fast to joining. That's the probability of joining. To join with probability 1 when they hear join, they still need to be convinced to bulk when I tell them to bulk. But it goes to 0 at the end. I can tell you. It takes a few more periods. I think the issue that customers are still trying to sometimes do get positive experience, and that they still try to join. So this is when equilibrium exists. That's what we see. When an equilibrium, that's when influential equilibrium. When influential equilibrium does not exist, that's a babbling equilibrium. What is a babbling equilibrium? Remember, initially, whenever we try to prove, we could almost always prove the fact that it exists, and at the end it broke. Once siding with the customer, once siding with the firm, there is some value there, but very quickly the firm is losing its credibility. The firm is trying to extract to match, and the customers are now trying to lose. And that's exactly what we see here. That's a babbling. A babbling means that I give you 2 messages, and for these 2 messages, you just react in the same way. And actually, that's what we see in several quant centers that we work to. They said, we are very credible. Our customers really believe what we tell them. They react properly. And then we look at their graphs, and the customers do whatever they want. And that's a little bit like that. It's not as crisp as what we see here, of course, but it's a...
The update rule is that the customers perform their action, and then they get to see the reward, is it?
Exactly. So in that model, if the utility was positive, based on whether positive or negative, they update. So they not even on the extent, just positive or negative. Right. And what if an equilibrium does not exist? Think about the upper triangle where a babbling equilibrium does not exist in pure strategies. That's how it looks. Just complete chaos. I mean, the firm is opportunistic in the way they update. The customer is opportunistic in the way they react. And it just goes all over the place. I mean, where you see here, it's actually the firm changed even the message. Try to say the customer bulk as a way to induce him to join, because he's reacting in a completely different way. But that's how non-equilibrium look like. But what the result at the end, what it seems here, and then we still need to tighten that up, is that whenever an influential equilibrium exists, it's a very strong attraction point. And we know why. We understand why. Because of the fact that it is value enhancing for both sides. When it exists, even though you can be very close to babbling, you will be attracted towards the influential equilibrium. So while there are clearly many assumptions in the model, assumptions on what people know and common knowledge and all that, don't exist in practice, if there is an influential equilibrium in the system, we can convince the customer, and the profits and the utilities convince the customer to go towards an influential equilibrium. How are we doing in terms of time? So that's until. I'm not going to stretch it too much. So I mean, there is clearly I can go on and on and on, but it's a. Okay, so let me. So this is just kind of a description of the basic model, and I think most of these results I kind of mentioned. I think the key thing for us in our mind is the idea that the firm never wants to tell the truth. I think that firms are investing a lot in knowing exactly how much they need to say. What we are saying is that you don't need actually to tell the truth. I mean, exactly, I have 97 customers in line, and my estimation is that you're going to wait 10.1 minutes. That's not beneficial in the long run. It's really more important to think about exactly how customers think and what's the incentive compared to yours. One of the things that if you're very excited about the talk and go home and immediately call your favorite call center, you will realize that you're not getting the announcement immediately. You're getting the announcement only after a while. And that's someone that monitored the call center and just got initially the information that on reneging, on how customers leave the line. No information, that was for many years ago. So he didn't even get information on how much, when customers get the information. But he noticed the big peak here. When he called, these customers left here just because you picked up the line, you're not planning to stand in line. So if no one is answering immediately, you shut down. Some waited, and after they waited and they got the announcement, we don't know what they got, but after a minute they decided to renege. That's the next peak. And from this point on, these are just people that decided to leave. So the question that we want to ask is, what will be the impact of the fact that I'm delaying the information provision? It's pretty late in the talk, so I'm not going to belabor that too much. But what the model that we look at, we say, if initially we provided the information here, and we call that agent-based service, that's when you actually have to talk with the service. In many places, what they have an IVR, an interactive voice response. Think about, you call a call center, you punch the social security number, you punch all kinds of things, and only then, after you wait, only then you get the delay announcement. And we call that, we say, I mean, in queue notation, we say infinity because there's really no resources invested in that. And here, it's an MMN, so there are some resources that are invested. The previous one can be done with MMN as well. We don't know the arrival rate here. The question that you want to ask yourself, why is that different? Let's assume for a second that in the paper we do look at what the case if this is actually value enhancing. But what if you don't get any value from that? Is that beneficial to delay the information? How can that help in delaying the information? The first thing that we want to look at is, if before it was very clear the firm is a threshold, now it's not so clear anymore. And what we need to show is that we show that the optimal threshold for the firm is like a switching curve, basically, for every number of people. Because now the firm knows how many people stand in the IVR. For every number of people in the IVR, there is a threshold above which, if there are too many people in the ABS, I'm going to reject the customer. Surprisingly, this problem was not solved before in the queuing literature, but that's kind of just a minor dent that we had to go through. That will help me now in characterizing the equilibrium, because at the end of the day, the goal is to know what kind of equilibrium exists. So let me do this slide, and then we'll finish. So I'm trying to see what kind of equilibrium exists. We saw before that it exists between a certain area and doesn't exist otherwise. What happened here? Remember, the firm would like the customer to join in the area below that curve. The customer, mind you, we know that for now we can focus on the first best for the firm. The customer doesn't care how many customers stand behind him. He cares only for how many customers stand before him. So when he's going to get a message, he will know that the firm is having a very complex system. He will try to project on how many people stand in front of him when he gets this message. Similarly, when he's going to get the message high, he's going to try to project how many customers stand then in the system. What I will say that you can look at these two thresholds, which might be too complex to compute, but for every system you can compute them, and say, according to these two thresholds, whether an equilibrium exists or not. What do I mean? Let's look at the threshold of the customer. That's the threshold of the customer. What does that mean? The customer is getting positive utility if, when he joins, there are fewer people than that in the system, and he's going to get negative utility if he joins when there are more people than that, on average. Will that be an equilibrium? Will be an equilibrium if the customer's threshold is below this threshold? The answer is no, because if the firm is going to tell low congestion, then the customer knows that even in low congestion, he's going to get negative utility. What we show is that there is no influential equilibrium. If the customer's threshold is now between these two, now when the firm is going to get, say, low, it's going to be positive utility. If the firm is saying high, it's going to be negative utility. Exactly what it needs to do. It needs to bulk here, it needs to join here. So there is a two-signal equilibrium. And you can show here that there is no influential equilibrium. What we show, and I'll just go directly to the result, that you can, if you now put these, ask, should I delay or not delay? What am I gaining by delaying? Is you're getting the following. You actually manage to expand the set along which there is an equilibrium. So now you are able to have cases where you can provide information you couldn't do it before. But at the same time, you're contracting the region. I think as a way to finish the talk, I think it's important to think about why we get an expansion. Remember at the beginning of the talk, when I asked you the question of if a firm is saying in the lower triangle, if the firm is saying low, if the firm is saying high, assuming that all other customers bulk when I say high, what is the state of the system? It was very easy to detect the state of the system. The state of the system was exactly the point after where the threshold. By moving it from one dimension to 2 dimensions, I now made this signal noisy. Now the customer cannot possibly detect exactly how many customers are in front of him, and that breaks the ability to break the equilibrium. So the expansion, and what we show again, that when there is an expansion, it is valuable for both sides, and when there is contraction, it's not bad. It's actually value distracting for both sides. And that's somewhat the end of the talk. The end of the talk is the fact that providing information is beneficial. And there are operational ways, for example here, delaying the information provision may help me in improving my credibility. There are other ways that we can discuss in other papers of improving the credibility by using simple operational tools, because at the end of the day, if you can create influential language, it is beneficial for all sides, for the firm, clearly, but also for the customers. That's the end of the talk. So if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. These are the list of the papers that if you want to, most of that is in the first one, but some of that is in later papers, and we also, the 2 issues that I discussed now, how to teach your customers, we go into now. What we started recently doing is an empirical study, actually with the same bank that many years ago did the 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we we take the data, and we are planning to go back and experiment with their data.
Do you have a sense of why these Southwest and so had these 2 cents things? Did they really study the problem and come to this conclusion, or they just come up with this because I'm wondering?
That's a good question. None of them until now were willing to communicate that. Okay. I'll give you an example with the discussion with Amazon. Amazon provides some information sometimes, they not provide information other times. And we asked them, how do they do it? They said, we are not willing to collaborate. It's a very sensitive issue. But we can tell you that we tell always very accurate information. And I said, but let's look at the website, and we see that some products you do give information, some products you do not. Say, oh no, when we have too much inventory, we are not interested in saying that to the customer. So firms are very sensitive in the way they do that. I think this bank specifically is willing to collaborate with us because it's a bigger collaboration. But I didn't really manage to get. I will not be surprised if they experimented, and over time just saw that too much information, customers just don't know what to do, and giving these 2 signals is very indicative of, if it's 1 minute, only those, everybody can stay. If it's 10 minutes, only those who really need it should stay. I think that's probably was the rationale. Because not all airlines do that. American Airlines have a complete mess, for example, in their announcement. It's almost seems every department does something else.
Have you considered introducing behavioral components, such as like this utility of lying?
Yes, so that we have not done. There is a literature on almost cheap talk, where there is some cost for that. The results are, to some extent, as lying become less and less costly, you get close to that. As the lying become more and more costly, you'll get closer to the state. So the results are not going to be very surprising if you take this literature and what we've seen from here. If you think about behavioral, I thought you meant more like a risk aversion issue like that, or a vagueness aversion. So I think the result there is not very different. I mean, I think the result will not be very different as long as you get, what is crucial for most of the results here is the fact that there exists a threshold for the firm and a threshold for the customer. And that exists for many, many problems. As long as you can map the problem into a threshold, I think that will be very much the same. Or a set of threshold. I didn't have time to go into what if you have multiple classes, but if you have multiple classes, I think I mentioned that if you have n classes, you will have at most n+1 messages, which allow you to segment them, the customer, into their classes, basically. At most. Yeah.
Using current technology on the internet, I think about companies that say, well, just like having a knowledge base or FAQs or anything like that, they say, if you can like do it yourself, like I know companies that are very successful, even with me, even though I think we're online, they say, you know, you might want to take a look at our website. It might be able to help you answer, to like help you instead of whole walking. You keep a positive relationship as opposed to just.
But so that many firms try to do that. What you try to do by that is try to reduce the cost of waiting. But sometimes it can be very frustrating. I was trying to call TI Cref the other day, and I was trying to call because I lost my password. And for 10 minutes, they just told me, you can go to the website and do that. You can go to the website and do that. I cannot go to your website. So it's it seems that what Dell tried to do, Dell was trying to put on the website, you would tell them what problem you have. You would tell them like you have an XP, Windows XP with Office on it, and it's a desktop and so on, and they will say you should call between 4 to 5. You should call. They will have a graph of the hours that there is more volume. They took that away. That's, I think, fall under the category maybe of too much information. People just didn't know what to do with it. Because but they definitely try to do something very, very close to provide really. I mean, the TSA are doing that now. I'm not sure how many of you on your iPhone there is My TSA. My TSA gives you the times for different airports, and until now at least, it's based on people's experience. So I can go and I say, well, 30 minutes, and then they will update it. But at least it should be towards the end really real-time updates of check-in, and security in different airports in different times in real time. So the government is moving. I mean, they don't know how to check other things, but times they will know to measure.
Model has the problems there, right? If I'm going to be in the airport in 1 hour, I may say that the line is too long.
No, don't. It's not. I did not try that. I was on my way to LAX, and I would say why. I was on my way to LAX a few hours, 48 hours ago, and I was trying to do exactly that, just to see how quickly they update. Not so much with any sinister, but they didn't update it that quickly. So I guess they maybe do it 24 hours after that as a way to not allow people to impact. I don't know why, but it's a good suggestion. Okay, as I said, I'll be here in the next few days. So if you have any questions, any comments, anything, I'll be happy to take them. Yes?
I know you people are exhausted. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that almost gone. Or the equivalent of companies who you go by, it says going out of business, and they've been going out of business for the past 3 years. So
there I think, well, as long as there is a single retailer, you should not believe what they say. That's the result. The result is that the bias between the firm and the customer is too big to believe what the customer is saying. However, and so think about, like, in their case, you should not take the word for granted. You should not buy it, even if they say buy it, or unless, you know, that in Germany, for example, you're not allowed to say sale unless the product appeared before the period, unless it's, so there are many restrictions on what. The interesting case is that if there are multiple sources of information on the same inventory, then you should believe. What do I mean? Think about airline. You can buy the flight this morning from O'Hare to Boston, 7D on the Delta flight. Let's say there is a Delta flight. You can buy seat 7D from multiple. You can buy it on Kayak, you can buy it on Delta, you can buy it on Air France. If they tell you that there are 3 items left, 3 seats left, actually it is truthful. And the proof is, well, we first of all did it for we took many screenshots to try to see that's what they do. But the proof is very much the customer now has the ability to go and punish basically the firm that is trying to induce him to buy. So what you do is that you take the 2 messages and try to say, if one message is trying to induce me to buy and the other one does not seem to induce me to buy, I'm going to wait until the other firm. I'm going to wait until the end of the period, or until I really need to buy it. You may not buy it when you had to buy it, but more likely or not, you will be okay, and you're going to induce them to tell the truth. So when you see airlines or other cases where, in website many times, if you buy ellipticals and all of these, many of these websites point to the same set of inventory. They're just different faces to the same inventory. If they tell you that there are 3 items left, usually it is truthful. There is a new service called Milo. Milo, it's like a dog that's going to fetch the information. I don't know there if the information is truthful or not. They supposedly go directly to the firms. But that's where the almost gone came from the fact that it's usually, if it's a single firm telling me you're almost gone, it's not. So at least we have no incentive to believe it is. Yes, that's it. Yeah, thank you.